And that's why it's getting hot, I can feel the heat. It's too cold, I can feel the street. I'm just trying to make it through the day, not in my head trying to feel the beat. I'm trying to feel the beat. I'm trying to feel, just wanna feel. I'm trying to feel the beat. You gotta feel the beat. I'm trying to feel the beat. I just wanna feel the beat. I'm trying to feel the beat.
Feel the beat. 278 people have fallen victim to gun violence in the United States over the past 72 hours. Is now a good time to talk about gun reform?
The George Croom Experience, presented by Ad Closure, the secret agent of top agents. Is your home being marketed or is it just listed? Tell your agent you want Ad Closure marketing to help sell your home faster.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the George Croom Experience. I am George Croom. This is episode number 11. We had so much fun yesterday bringing that in, and I'm so happy that you all were able to join us for that. I'm happy that you're here today, and we've got a lot of things on our plate, so we're going to pay some bills real quick and get this thing started. This George Croom Experience is presented by Ad Closure, the secret agent of top agents. Talk to your agent about adding Ad Closure marketing and sell your home just a little bit quicker. So we had a different kind of show for the first segment than what we're going to do right now. But today some breaking news came out and I felt like we needed to address it. So breaking news is that Brittney Griner, the WNBA player, all-star, first round draft pick in the WNBA draft. She's also a champion in college. She was detained in Russia for having marijuana vapes, and she's been there for quite some time. If you remember back to the first show, we talked about Brittney Griner and her detainment, my feelings on that. And I said that if she were a male, she would have been home by then. And behind the scenes, they've continued to work, and thankfully so, because Brittney Griner on this day is on her way back home. Prisoner swap was done for a person that was an arms dealer, a known arms dealer who was in prison, in a U.S. prison, and he has been released as well, sent back to Russia, and we're getting her back. But now that she is on her way home, there's two things that can also be true at the same time. And I have to say now, if Paul Whelan, who is also detained in a Russian prison, he's been detained since 2018. If Paul Whelan was an athlete, would he be home? He was also wrongfully detained, and he's just a regular Midwest guy who happens to be a security analyst, and he was over there and they arrested him because they believed he was there performing espionage. And he's been locked away. They gave him a 16-year prison term. He's already served 4 of it, but Paul Whelan is still there. And his family's saying all the right things today. So happy Brittney got sent home. So happy that the U.S. government made this deal for her. We wish that Paul was home, but I'm glad they got whatever deal they could. And that's the right answer for a family looking to still get help from the U.S. government to get their family member home. But the real question is, outside of this, is when is Paul also coming home? Look, I've been a huge advocate of Brittney coming home. I've said it since the beginning, so nobody can sit here and say that what I'm saying is that I'm not happy that Brittney Griner is coming home. I'm ecstatic. This is exactly what should be happening, because I truly, truly believe that if Brittney Griner were a male, she would have been home already. But all I'm saying is, just as Brittney Griner said when she wrote the letter, don't forget about us and the other Americans. She didn't just say, don't forget about me. She said, don't forget about us, me, and the other Americans that are here. When she wrote her letter to President Biden back in the summer, she said, don't forget about all of us. And in the famous words of Kobe Bryant, the job's not finished. That's all I'm saying. We'll be right back. G1 Commercial is a proud sponsor of the George Croom Experience. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. George Croom Experience here with you, show number 11. Man, I can't even tell y'all. It's amazing. So, getting into it, today is a bittersweet because DCEP is out with a little bit of sickness, a little bit of problems in the cosmos. So, we will not be with DCEP today, but I was able to pull Mom in the clutch. She came kicking and screaming, but she's going to fill in for DCEP. Bring us in, Mom.
A day that lives in infamy is memorialized right here in Baltimore.
All right, so my wife and I attended a Pearl Harbor memorial yesterday. Pearl Harbor was December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese decided that they would thrust the U.S. into the war in the Pacific, and at a larger point, they would thrust the U.S. into World War II by attacking Pearl Harbor. Many men were killed, and so every year we commemorate that event and how it sparked what we now call the greatest generation of men to take the charge to protect not only the United States, but the world as a whole. And it was held on a high endurance cutter 37, which is a ship that sits in Baltimore Harbor. And I'm going to tell you, I've sat here and looked at this ship multiple times, and I had no clue the history of this ship. And as I sat there, I had a range of emotions after hearing about the history and then understanding some of the things that surround it. First, this is the last warship that is still floating that was at Pearl Harbor. They were sitting in the harbor on that day, fought off the Japanese on that day, stayed afloat, continued to fight throughout World War II. And it made me truly proud to live in a place like Baltimore that's able to harbor some of that history. And on top of that, the history of Baltimore and Maryland as a whole. Like Maryland, without Maryland, we are not the United States. It was a Maryland militia of 400 men that went to New York during the Revolutionary War and fought off the British in order to provide cover for George Washington and the rest of the Continental Army to get out of New York during the Battle of Long Island. Without that, the war is over before it starts. The United States is still a part of Britain, and we are not who we are today. We're not sitting here doing this today. So it's awesome to understand that history of Maryland. The second part of my emotions during this thing was how far we've come. So in 2020, this ship that we were sitting on, it used to be called the U.S. Coast Guard Cutter Taney. Now, if that name doesn't ring a bell, then let me educate you. So Roger B. Taney was a Supreme Court justice in the 1800s, and he was the one that provided us the majority decision in the Dred Scott case. The Dred Scott case that said that black men and black people as a whole were so far inferior that they had no rights which a white man was bound to respect. And that's who they named this ship after. They named this ship that sailors had to serve on for years, for decades, after a person who said, we don't have to respect black people. There had to be black sailors on that ship at some time. And the keynote speaker came and he spoke about a person named Dory Miller. Now, Dory Miller was also at Pearl Harbor. He was on the USS West Virginia, and he was a cook. Dory Miller, when the Japanese came in, was one of the biggest guys on the ship, was a fighter, was one of the best boxers on the ship, the best boxer on the ship. He drug his captain to safety, and as the ship was sinking, manned the gun that they would not let him use otherwise because he was black, but because everybody was dying around him, he manned the gun and took down over 5 Japanese aircraft. Then jumped in the water and started dragging his fellow sailors to shore to safety. And then in 2020, he became the first enlisted sailor and the first African American to have a supercarrier named after him. It goes into commission later in this decade. And that's important because in the same year that a blatant and outright racist, like, and we can go through the historical perspective of it, and like how Taney was just a product of his times, being a Southern person. I get it. Blatant and outright racist put onto the side of a U.S. ship that people of color had to serve on. And then you have the same story on the other side, that in 2020, a guy like Dory Miller could have a supercarrier named after him. And we only name carriers after presidents. So this man This man who served in World War II, who lost his life in World War II, who was a hero of World War II, replaced, in my mind, while I was sitting there, it was like he was replacing the hatred and the racism. And he let people know that he's not inferior. And he also has qualities that we are bound to respect.
Is Baltimore City's management in need of an overhaul when the George Croom experience returns?
What is an asset-based lending philosophy? An asset-based lending philosophy focuses on assets instead of income. Let me explain. A traditional mortgage requires the borrower to prove they make enough income to cover their mortgage payment and all other debts. The amount of your income used to pay your debt is limited to somewhere around 50%. This means that if your debt is greater than the maximum debt-to-income ratio, your loan is denied. An asset-based loan doesn't use your income to qualify. It uses the property securing the loan and its ability to generate cash flow or appreciation as the primary qualifier. In a nutshell, G1 Commercial Mortgage is a bank alternative mortgage finance company for real estate investors. If you get denied by a bank or do not want to go through the traditional bank underwriting process, give us a call.
Now, love and Bmore.
Welcome back to the George Croom Experience. I am George Croom, and it's about that time that we start talking love and Bmore. Of course, I told you I'm going to start bringing more Baltimore into this show. So we're going to talk about love and Bmore. Bring us in, Mom.
Is Baltimore City Council working against the will of the people?
All right, so the Baltimore City Council will introduce an amendment coming up. They will introduce an amendment that strikes down what the citizens of Baltimore voted on, which was Question K. Now, we can debate the merits of Question K. Question K was a proposal on the ballot in 2022 that asked if we should have term limits imposed on the city council. And the people overwhelmingly voted yes for that. Now, opponents of the bill would say that we should not be putting something like this in because all this is doing is entrenching the belief around Baltimore City that they're trying to put out people of color so that they can move in white people, and that the leadership that we have is being elected by the people, and they expect those people to stay in there for as long as they want to. Well, I get that. I said no to Question K not because of any of the racial tensions that surround Question K. I said no to Question K because I think the time limit that they wanted to impose, which was 2 terms of 4 years. Sure, you should be able to get a lot of things done in 8 years, but who's your leadership in that time? When do you have leadership elections? Usually we do it after an election. So if you're going to tell me that our leadership is going to change every 8 years, possibly, that's not enough time to groom real leaders with true understanding of what's going on. Someone tell me I'm wrong about that. I think if we're going to do any term limits, they can't be less than 12 years. Because 12 years gives the people long enough to have a leader that they want, and that leader long enough to understand the system we have, to understand some of the nuances, and to truly work through some of the minutia that is there. We can say that we should have a government that has less regulation, that has less roadblocks to getting the job done, sure. But I am telling you right now that at 8 years, you don't have time to work through the minutia of being in any office almost in this country and get things done. Not in a city as big as Baltimore. But I do agree that there are people in city council in Baltimore and higher in Baltimore that should not be here. I'm not telling you I like the leadership. I'm telling you that we need to be able to groom leaders over time, and telling them that they only have 8 years to do that. I don't think that's enough. I think that's too high of turnover too fast. And I think that we're going to run into a cycle where we're turning over so quickly that people come in who are built off of emotions and not getting the job done. Not to mention, if you're only there for 8 years, you're more beholden to the people who are putting you in power with their money, because I'm only here for a short time. Sure, over time you're gonna get pushed into the money, but how quickly do you think money will become a factor in politics when I only got 8 years to get my agenda pushed through with this politician? You're gonna see how quickly your term limits turn around the government you have when you start imposing strict limits like that. It's my 2 cents. But I still don't think that the city council should be able to push this back onto the ballot, because to repeal question K is one thing, but to put it back on the ballot, you're going to start to confuse voters, and they're going to vote for it no matter what. We should have a term limit. If you want to make it better, you can ask to make it better. For a repeal, just 2 years after we already voted it in, I think that's the wrong move. Bring it in, Mom.
If we don't pay the people doing the important work in Baltimore City, where are our priorities?
Stories have come out over the last few months about how Baltimore does not pay its contractors. Baltimore does not pay the nonprofits that work with it. These people keep the wheels moving. These nonprofits are the ones that are performing programs in the city for education, for the homeless, for LGBTQ community, and they're doing that with the agreement, with a handshake agreement, no less, with the city, that they're going to get a contract and get paid for it so they can have the resources to do the work, because the city government doesn't have the infrastructure, the people in place to do these programs. But the city isn't giving them contracts. So they'll perform these jobs for a year or two, and then they start to fall off. They start to go under because they don't have the money to continue, because the city is not providing them contracts, and then isn't paying them on time. We've got contractors, general contractors, guys who fix roads, guys who are restoring historical buildings, guys and gals. I'm inclusive here, guys and gals, and everything in between, who are there performing these jobs, and they're working for contractors who aren't getting paid. How do we expect the wheels to continue turning? How do we expect a person who owns a contracting company to say that they want to do business with the city of Baltimore if the city of Baltimore is known to not pay contractors? I wouldn't want to work with the city of Baltimore knowing that. I have a contracting company. I don't work with the city of Baltimore. Not happening. If you're not going to pay people, that doesn't make sense. I can't keep my doors open if I'm working to keep your doors open and you're not paying me. So that's where we are. And I'm going to tell the city of Baltimore, while you're worrying about how long you can stay in office and getting rid of the will of the people, you should start paying the people who are doing the work to bring more people to this city, so that we don't have the financial issues and so that we don't have the poor stigma that we have around the country. We'll be back after this.
Mother Nature is under attack, and Saint Nick is the attacker. More when we return after the break.
Wait, shouldn't every video your team puts out draw an emotion? Take the viewer on a journey. And highlight your markets as places they can live and call home. Christmas trees obviously don't fall on the list of climate-saving measures. This will likely get me in some trouble at home because my wife loves live trees. I grew up with the same fake tree, we can call it artificial, whatever, throughout my youth, and actually prefer them. No mess, no fuss, and a tree, somewhere gets to live. See, I remember my mom and I dragging our Christmas tree from the attic every single year, matching the little wire frames at each level and attaching them to the base, making sure, of course, to spread the leaves so it looked more real. My first live tree came in 2020 when my wife, child, and I went to a little farm in Carroll County, Maryland. I used a hacksaw to chop down the tree. I drug it to the car in a little rickety wagon and then secured it to the roof of our car. It later filled our home with love during the holiday season, even if it was a little too large for our space. See, my attachment to the tree, though, it was zero. When the holidays were over, I packaged the tree up as tight as I could so 1 million needles didn't fall on the floor. I took it to the curb and I left it there. See, I never saw or thought about that tree again. The fake tree of my youth filled me with a sense of pride as my mom and I decorated it, arguing the entire time about how to do it right. See, it's estimated that over 25 to 30 million trees are sold every year in the US. 10 times that many are planted, though, to prepare for the future seasons. For the unsold or used trees, there are over 4,000 tree recycling services around the country. In Louisiana, some leftover trees are used to help restore coastal marshes. In parts of Illinois, old Christmas trees have been used to create nesting structures for endangered herons. In South Dakota, trees have been dropped into a lake to improve fish habitats. And in San Francisco, spare Christmas trees have been fed to goats. The goats. So maybe Mother Earth isn't suffering all that much. But my attachment is still with the old wire-framed fake Christmas tree of my youth. It always reminded me that Christmas was never that far away, even if it felt like it was never soon enough. And while my family never believed that a guy named Santa would slide down the chimney, I always knew that wire-framed tree would slide down from the attic every single year. Be good to each other. See you tomorrow.